So, welcome after a bit of a lengthy summer break, and I want to start with a question, which I'd like you to answer. It's going to be anonymous, but it's not very, very private anyway. If I can just find it, tonight's topic is Pidyon Haben. And the question is, well, you'll see it now. How many Pidyon Haben ceremonies have you attended in your life? So if you can just quickly share that with us. For those who've just joined us, how many Pidyon Haben ceremonies have you attended in your life? And you'll understand why I'm posing the question in a moment. We've got, I don't know if you can see the results anywhere, but we've got 2 people who have attended none, 1 who has attended 1, and 3 individuals who've attended 2. We got no answer, 3 or above.
Just leave.
Sorry? Yeah. Okay, let's leave the question up for another second. Okay, if you can see the poll, the question is, how many Pidyon Haben ceremonies have you attended? And as I said, from the respondents, half of the people who attended 2. Oh, here's somebody who's attended 3. Okay, and I think personally, I've attended maybe 4, maybe 5. I'm not sure. I'd have to really count up. But oh, there we go. Share results. How does that work? Can you see it somewhere? Anyway, if you can, you can. There we go. Okay. My point is, no, keeps on coming back. My point is, Pidyon Habens are very rare. And there's a good reason why they're very rare. But as we'll see when we start our discussion, if you find out and you're invited to one, don't turn down the invitation. It's not like a bris where you're not supposed to turn it down, but the great merit of attending a Pidyon Haben is such that you really do want to attend it. Why is it so rare? Actually, current stats are that it happens in between 10 and 12% of births of firstborn actually end up with the Pidyon Haben. So some quick maths, 50% son, so that would have to be a male. But then it actually has to be a natural birth, and with a tendency these days favoring cesarean sections, well, that's no longer what we'll see in the verses in a moment, the opening of a womb, which is how the mitzvah is described in the Torah. So a cesarean birth wouldn't qualify, nor would a birth that's not strictly speaking the opening of the womb, which means that if there was a late miscarriage preceding the first birth, and I'll just speak to a rabbi to define late miscarriage, but the point is then there wouldn't be the baby that opened the womb. It would no longer qualify for a Pidyon Haben. So where's this concept of a special ceremony specifically for the firstborn son? And actually, it does come from this week's parasha, but as a rule, first especially sanctified. First especially sanctified. So we have that, for example, with Bikurim, first fruit, which have to be, consecrated. I'll give you another example because I don't want to dwell on it too long. But there's also the mitzvah of Reshit Hagez, which is your first shearing. You put aside some of that and you give it to the Kohen. As a rule, that a first is imbued with a special ray of sanctity, of holiness, as a result of which they are considered holy. But in the parasha of Bo, right at the very end, That's how the parasha actually closes, with the paragraph that discusses the mitzvah of remembering the Exodus. And in the process, it says, Hashem tells us that the male firstborn, human and animal, first male of every ish of every womb, okay, those are the words Peter Kol Rechem, which I referred to earlier, among the Israelites is mine. The firstborn child is consecrated. And we see that following up. No, not yet. No. We see that theme right through. In fact, this portion of Kadesh called Bechor is contained in one of the 4 portions of the Tefillin. It's a very important. It's a very important portion that has to be remembered all the time. So this is where the sanctification of the firstborn comes in. In addition, and this is where this comes, holy from birth, from the beginning of history, where Hashem intended for the firstborn to be holy, but then an additional sanctity where God claims they're mine comes in at the point where there is the Makat Bechorot, which you read about in the Pasha, and the firstborn of the Egyptians perish, but the Jewish firstborn are saved. And at that point, Hashem says, they're mine because of the salvation, because of the miracle that I performed, which was the context of the verse you just had on the screen. But that was, my friends, plan A. And then something went wrong. What went wrong? Well, shortly thereafter, the Jews are out of Mitzrayim, they're at Mount Sinai, they received the Torah, and then, of course, we know there is the golden calf, and the Jews onto the one tribe that never got involved with the golden calf, and that is the tribe of Levi. And more specifically, there'll be the Kohanim who will perform the service. There'll be the rest of the tribe of Levi that are going to act as assistants and helpers in the Holy Temple. And in fact, there is a formal transfer that happens where, beginning of Bamidbar, when there's all these numbers, all these censuses of the Jewish people, and they're counted in various ways, there is a census of all the firstborn in the Jewish nation at the time. There's a census of all of the count of all of the tribe of Levi, and the numbers are kind of almost identical, 22,000 something. And there's an exchange which is made where the firstborn sanctity, like the first mass Pidyon Haben ceremony that happens. But there were, well, now I forget the number, 273 or thereabouts that were firstborn that didn't have a Levi to be exchanged for. And that's where we have the first financial Pidyon Haben, where they each pay 5 coins in their redemption. That's where we discover that firstborns are actually to be exchanged for money to kind of shed themselves of the sanctity which they were given. Coming back to our verses, here Hashem says, I have chosen the Levites, the tribe of Levi, instead of the firstborn. And this happened when I smote all the firstborn in Mitzrayim, and I sanctified all of the firstborn. And here, also in Bamidbar, we told there is to be an exchange for money. That's the 5 shekels, which is the redemption price for the tribe of Levi. What was the first exchange of birthright, or Pidyon Haben? Well, maybe I gave it away by showing that slide a little bit too early. Does that give it away? That's the red lentil soup, which Yaakov made. It was actually for his father, who was in mourning. But this ends up being the price that he pays to his brother Esav, who comes back from the field, is extremely hungry, and he wants food. And Yaakov says, well, sell me your birthright. Esav has got no interest. He appreciates that the birthright is something very special, very precious, but that's for those who are interested in those religious responsibilities, which the firstborn were destined to carry. He says, I'm not interested. Yaakov then makes this deal, gives him the lentil soup, and with that, the firstborn then goes on to Yaakov, and of course that's the way we as a nation become the servants of Hashem, the chosen people, the people who are going to carry the torch, which was first given to Abraham and then handed to Yitzchak, and then he's going to go to Yaakov rather than having gone to Esav. What is the purpose, the deepest significance of the ceremony, before we actually have a look at what goes on at Pidyon Haben, which, as I mentioned before, so few people have attended. There are many gifts that go to the Kohanim. The Kohanim are the spiritual leaders. The Kohanim are the people who give direction. It was meant for Kohanim to be completely, living near the Holy Temple, engrossed in the study of Torah at all times, and had no source of income. And the Israelites supported them with many gifts, with the tithes, the terumah, as I said, with the bikurim, which is not much with the first shearings. There are actually 24 financial privileges accrued to the Kohanim. Some of them are sacrifices that are brought into the Holy Temple. Others are other benefits. There's certain portions in every animal that they slaughtered. You have to give the Kohen Zerah L'chaim and Keva, part of the stomach, part of the cheeks, as well as one forearm, sort of forward leg. And that is something that is part of bringing a child into the covenant of Hashem. This is the firstborn child, and we want to bring him to a Kohen, and we want to kind of enshrine in the mind, the consciousness of the Jewish people, that a very important precept that's going to be taught to a child from that age already, 30 days, that's what Torah tells us, as soon as it's a month old. So we do the Pidyon Haben on the 31st day. We want to, first of all, enshrine, even in the subconscious mind of a young child, this importance of supporting the Kohanim. We also want to create a contact, a connection with the Kohen being the priest, being the teacher, being the leader, being he who is going to be the shining light of the values of Torah. We want to create that bond, that connection at an early age. Let me kind of open up a siddur for you, and let's go through the ceremony, and as we go through it, we can look at various aspects of it. Pidyon Haben. So here we go. Child's brought in normally on a platter, and here's a very interesting custom that I actually only found out the source from today, and I've attended, as I said, 4 or 5 Pidyon Habens at least in my life, and the custom is that the woman in attendance remove the jewelry and place it on the baby. And I thought it was quaint. It was nice to make the baby look, decorated very beautifully, although it doesn't always look all that nice. But thinking back of the deep connection between Pidyon Haben ceremony and the golden calf. At the golden calf, where the people of Israel divested themselves of the jewelry and gave it away for Aaron to now make this idol for them. And now that we're kind of dealing with the consequences. Pidyon Haben wouldn't have existed if there hadn't been a golden calf. We would still be left with the actual little baby being consecrated here. So at that ceremony of Pidyon Haben, we divest ourselves of our jewelry. The women didn't. But nowadays, women are the ones who wear jewelry, or men may be wearing some chains or bracelets or necklaces or whatever. So we do that, and we decorate the baby with this jewelry to say, look, yeah, we're actually removing It doesn't stay with the baby. At the end of the Pidyon Haben, it goes back to the owners, except like what happened at my eldest grandson's Pidyon Haben, with one particular piece of jewelry didn't get returned at the end of the Pidyon Haben. We spent a lot of time looking all over the room until we actually did locate it. So yeah, but that jewelry doesn't remain, definitely doesn't get used for adulterous purposes. Here, the baby is brought in, and the father presents the child to the Kohen, and he makes this declaration, actually quoting from the verses that we've read before, and says, I've got the mitzvah, and I present the baby to you first to fulfill the mitzvah. And at that point, the Kohen is presented with they talk about silver dollars, but it actually does not have to be dollars. It can be any monetary value. I forget exactly, but it's 5 shekalim. So if the silver dollar definitely qualifies, it has to be a certain weight of pure gold. And the silver dollar, if you have the original ones, are definitely not the ones that we only put out in the 80s, which is the Susan B. Anthony dollar. No, the original silver dollars, those are the right amount and the right weight. So they're traditionally used, although if you can find other silver coins, that's fine. And this is what the Kohen says to: do you want to give me your firstborn son, which is the first issue of his mother's womb, or would you rather redeem him for 5 shekalim, as you're required to do by the Torah? I'm not going to put up a poll, but from those of you who attended the Pidyon Haben, Pidyon Haben in your lives, has the answer ever been no? You keep the child. At that point, it's their firstborn, remember? He's still cute and cooey and all good things, and maybe he's kept him up at night. But normally Hashem is very kind of, the first child sleeps through and is very good. That's why there are second and third children in families, because if the first child behaved like second and third subsequently, there'd be much more one-child families in the world. But this is 30 days, and the answer is obviously always yes, of course. We want the child, and we're going to give you the money, and particularly as it isn't really a choice, because if you look at even the declaration that the Kohen makes, it's redeem for 5 shekalim as you're required to do by the Torah. And the father replies, but he reads from the Siddur, and it's in Aramaic, and maybe there's English translation. But even he says, I wish to redeem my son. Here's the value of his redemption, which I'm required to give according to the Torah. So that's a strange part of the ceremony where, what is this about? Why this question? What does it mean? Jokingly, I've heard the rabbis sermonize at Pidyon Habens, guilty myself, I've used it once at least, where they will say, fine, so you made a declaration that you prefer your child, and you prefer that to the money. Remember that for the rest of your life. And when you are well into your career and the child comes home and says, Dad, what time are you coming home? He said, sorry, I've got to stay late at the office because I got to make another buck and another buck and another buck. Think back of this boy's Pidyon Haben, where he may clearly said, I prefer this child to the 5 silver coins. But really, why this exchange? It's actually about kind of enshrining in the parent's mind the fact that this child is actually born sanctified and holy, and that we made an exchange. We changed him for money. But we always want to remember that this child was actually destined to be God's priest. That his destiny was to study Torah, like Penina about Samuel. He's going to grow up and live in the. Just wean him. He's going to grow up and live in the house of God and be dedicated to Hashem completely. That's where the destiny of that child really is. And the parents have got to realize that they're kind of making an exchange, and because they want the child to grow up in their home and they want him to be involved in matters more worldly and more mundane, so they're paying their way out of this by giving the Kohen the money. But that question is always got to remain with them. This is God's child, dedicated to God's endeavors, but we chose to redeem him out of this destiny, and having responded as expected, the father then holds the money and recites two brachot. The one's regular mitzvah bracha, asher kitchanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu al pidyon haben, and then there's also the bracha of shechianu, and the Kohen then takes the money, holds it over the child, and says, "Zeh tachat zeh, zeh chiluf, zeh zeh machul al zeh." This is instead of that, in exchange for that, this is pardon for that. May this child enter into life, into the study of Torah, chuppah, and good deeds. Amen. And then finally, the Kohen blesses the child with the traditional birkat kohanim, and makes a bracha of a glass of wine, borei pri hagafen. So if this is about taking the child away from his destiny as a holy man and moving him into the mundane, why do we even celebrate a pidyon haben? Why is it a celebration? It's got to be done. Well, why celebrate? Why call friends over? Why rejoice? Why have a festive meal? The answer is because though our destiny is, so though we would like to be involved in the work of God exclusively, that's not why we're created and put in this world. Our actual path, unless we are one of the Jews, and all Jews are not expected to remove themselves from engagement with the world, are not expected to be hermits, to live on top of a mountain top and have no connection and no interaction with the world. Our task, our challenge is to interact with the world, to elevate the world, to sanctify the world by engaging with it, by eating, by drinking, by conducting business, but doing all that within the guidelines of the Torah, and that way we elevate the world. Our destiny is not to remain secluded in the house of God, in a monastery, or in some kind of a retreat somewhere in the top of a mountain in Tibet. We are meant to go out and conquer the world and make the world into God's world, and that's a celebration. And that's what we have the pidyon haben. We actually kind of say this child is not going to be confined to be removed from the world. He's going to go out into the world, interact with it, and deal with it, and elevate it, and do mitzvahs, and that we actually celebrate. There is common belief that participating in the food of a pidyon haben, has the power equal to spending 84 days in fasting. And the power of fasting, of course, in terms of, atoning for sin, in terms of coming close to Hashem, is unbelievable. We just don't do that. We don't engage in fasting because that would weaken us and not enable us to serve Hashem in all the other ways. So we get so many other mitzvahs, and if we engaged in fasting, we would not be able to serve God properly. So it's kind of a practice that has been discontinued. I think in days of old, we had people who followed certain paths in life, that were very, hard on the body. Those are people that, get undressed and rolled in cold snow to atone for their sins. Those are people who spent, every Monday and Thursday in fasting, or some people spent every weekday in fasting, only eating, after dark or before dawn in the morning. We don't do that, but we accept the unbelievable power of fasts, and so it's a common belief that eating from a Pidyon Haben is equal to 84 such fasts, and number 84 is connected with specific sins that are brought down in Kabbalah and mysticism, that for certain sins you would have to spend 84 days fasting to achieve complete atonement. So, Pidyon Haben, eat from the Su'udah, or at least if you're sending your husband to the Pidyon Haben because you got to be at work early in the morning, take a little roll or a cookie and take it home. People do that for brisses also, but that's simply because the bris is a festive meal of a mitzvah, and it's nice to partake in it. But particularly for Pidyon Haben, there is this belief. There is no authoritative source for it. It's still a good thing because it's been done for so long, but there is no written source except a found and allusion brought down. Very interesting allusion, and I'll tell you where this is, because this verse is actually in the verse, in the section that describes that mass Pidyon Haben I was telling you about, where lots of Leviim were exchanged for lots of firstborn, but there were some extras and they had to pay money. And that money is referred to with a very strange word, kesef pidyon. Normally we talk in Hebrew about pidyon, like Pidyon Haben, but here we've got the final mem turning the word into pidyom for redemption money. But if you now look in Hebrew at the word pidyom, so you have the definite article ha, then you have pei and dalad, which is 84, and then you have the word yom, which is days. So this is where there's kind of allusion in the Torah to this idea of the redemption money and the Pidyon Haben and the 84 days, but it's just kind of an illusion. You wouldn't call that an authoritative source. Let me leave you with a final thought on the importance of this mitzvah. This is a verse we recite every day in our prayers. It's Psalm 148 or 148, I think. Magidra Yaakov, Chukav Mishpatav Israel. He issued his commandments to Jacob, his statutes and his rules to Israel. Says the Medrash on this, says the Gemara actually on this verse. He declares his words to Jacob, Psalm 147, there we go. And the Gemara says, because the attributes of the Holy One, blessed is he, are unlike the attributes of flesh and blood. And the emphasis here on, he declares his words, his statutes. The attribute of flesh and blood is that he instructs others to perform, but doesn't perform anything. It's, do as I say, not as I do. But the Holy One, blessed is not so. What he performs, he says to Israel to perform and to observe. So, for example, the Talmud talks about God's tefillin. It says, well, Hashem puts on tefillin. And the Talmud elsewhere says, so, wait a second, what's written in God's tefillin? Because our tefillin say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, God is one. What's in Hashem's tefillin? And Reb Chia says, it's the verse, Umi ke'amcha Yisrael goy echad ba'aretz. Who is like you people, Israel, one nation in the land? So God's tefillin have extolled the virtues of the one people, whereas our tefillin, of course, extol the virtue, the greatness of the one God. And so the Berditchever famously said, when a Jew drops tefillin on the ground, we react with, upset. We lift the tefillin, we kiss him immediately. Many people put tzedakah into the pushka immediately after they've dropped the tefillin on the ground. And the Berditchever turns to Hashem and says, well, you've dropped your tefillin onto the ground because the Jewish people are down and they're downtrodden and they're suffering. So please, God, bend down, lift up the Jewish people, hug them and extol them and raise them up. So if God puts on tefillin, then God's performed the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben. Who is God's firstborn? It's very clear. It actually was in the Parsha this past week when Moshe approaches Pharaoh and the redemption of the firstborn, then you got to redeem your firstborn. We have been so deeply, so powerfully in need of redemption. We turn to Hashem and say, God, it's time to redeem your firstborn Israel. May this redemption come speedily, please, very soon.